And we're back.
Welcome back to the Road to Code.
Oh, yeah. All right. So, what are we covering in this episode? We're going to be recapping the last episode. We'll just cover that briefly. We'll talk about our episodes. We're going to try to cut them down a little bit.
They've been a little bit too long.
Yeah.
I think.
We noticed that really quick. And so episode 3, I think we're gonna cap it. So we're gonna try to stick to the meat and potatoes of the
But
podcast.
also we've been going through a lot of meat and potatoes too, so it's hard to cut through that.
That's true. Yeah. It's just like, plus we've been peeling them too, not just going through them, but we're just peeling them too. So, and then we've been we included the fat in the meat too, so we might have to trim down on that. But yeah, we'll try to continue with the content. I think the one suggestion that we came up with is sticking to the meat and potatoes, but when we're peeling them and we have the extra fat, maybe we'll cut those out into separate videos as just like extras to the podcast. And so, which we have one, but we'll talk about that in a bit. So what's in this podcast? We have a change. We started with C#8 and .NET 3.1. And had we waited for episode 3 to be episode 1, we would have had the latest in the book, which is C#9 and .NET 5. So, but it's okay. It's okay. We are going to give Mark Price another plugin on the latest book. We picked it up earlier this week. And so we went ahead and dropped the older book, and we picked up the new book. And so we are going to be learning on the latest and greatest instructions that he has.
Yeah, and it's cool. Like, we're kind of still starting in the beginning process, and we get to have the brand new book, so everyone could see the process of us going through the brand new book too.
Yeah, definitely. So there is a couple of changes that I noticed in chapter 1 that I want to cover, and we'll briefly cover those. They're not that big of a deal, but then I'm gonna let you drive chapter 2, and we're gonna talk about. I mean, I've already know all that stuff. I think there are a couple of things that you are gonna teach me, and so that should be pretty interesting. And then at the very end, we're actually gonna spin it off into an extra of this episode. We don't want to bog down, and we don't want to make this episode more than an hour. So what we're going to do is we're going to continue on, but it'll be a separate, an extra piece of the podcast. And we're actually going to go through registering a domain, and we're going to host a Hello World website. And you'll be able to hit it through www.roadtocode.something. So I went searching for Road to Code, and roadtocode.com or theroadtocode.com is taken. Maybe Road to Code is available. I don't know. We have to check. But it'll be roadtocode.something, and you'll find out what it is when we register the domain and we post the extras from this episode. So that should be pretty interesting. So let's talk about a couple of changes that he talks about in chapter 1 in comparison to the chapter 1 from the previous book. First, let's go ahead and plug it in. Let me share my screen really quick. Can you see it?
Yeah.
So Mark J. Price, thank you. We're going to plug your book in once again. This book came in my email when we bought C#8 and .NET 3.1. That was when we started episode 1, right? We ended up purchasing it, and so this edition wasn't available just yet. So right when it came out, I got the email, and I was like, "Oh, darn it!" I was like, "We could have waited a couple of weeks." I was like, "Oh well." So Mark, we bought two more versions or two more books from you. So, hopefully it'll provide roof on your head, food on your table, clothing on the back of you and your family. So,
I think he knew when we bought the first version, he was like, "Oh, I should release the second one."
They're like, oh, they're ready for it. They
They're
just
ready.
bought it. Let's just go ahead and put that next one out. So we ended up getting it. Here's the plugin. Go out and get it if you're going to follow us on this podcast on the road to code. We're learning C#, and Jonathan, as he explained in episode 1, he's starting to code. He's done HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. But we're getting to C#. C# is a little bit more complicated, requires a little bit more guidance, and so we're using Mark Price's book to help with that. And so I've been working with C# since version -1, which is when it was in beta. So I've seen all the versions and I've done professional development with it. So I'm pretty familiar with what C# is capable of. But for Jonathan's benefit, he's going to be learning C# through this whole series. So everybody, sorry, go get the new book. Start off with chapter 3. You can go ahead and breeze through chapter 1 and 2. There, a lot of it is the same. There's not a whole lot of difference between the first and second and this next edition. I should call it 4th and 5th edition, I should say. There's not a whole lot of difference in the beginning, but he does cover some stuff in there that's a little different, and I want to talk about it. So I do want to talk about the LTS. And so LTS, where's that? Yeah, here it is. Okay, cool. Let me share my screen again. All right. So understanding LTS, you remember we talked about it in the last episode. We talked about how, you got the current version, and then you got LTS, and LTS stands for long-term support, which means that they're committed for a significant length of time to support that particular version. And what was interesting when I was reading this article, and we'll include the link to this article in the show notes, is that the difference between the difference between current and long-term is that the long-term, other than, obviously being supported for a longer term of time, you'll notice that their LTS used to be from like a 2.0 to a 2.1. And then, obviously the 2.2 and the 3.0, and then 3.1 became the LTS. And so right now we're learning on 5.0. But the difference between 2.0 and 2.1 is that 5.1 is not going to be the LTS version. 6.0 is actually going to be the LTS version. And you'll see the overlap between version 3.1 and 6.0, where there's a larger overlap of support. So even though 6.0 is going to come out in November 2021, 3.1 is going to be supported until the end of 2022. So it's, just over a year of support for 3.1 to allow people to get off that version of the framework and move into version 6. Now, you can jump into 5 and begin implementing it. And chances are between 5 and 6, very few things are going to change. But there will be some changes. There may be some breaking changes. We don't know. But the whole thing about having a current version is that they get some feedback. And then with that feedback, they improve on it and they release the next long-term or the LTS version, which is going to be 6.0. What's interesting about these numbers is that Linux does the same type of versioning, but they go based on a decimal. So for example, version 0.01 would be their current version, and then version 0.02 is their LTS. It's like, hey, this is the stable version, and this is what we're going to support for a while. And then version 0.03 is the current version. It's constantly changing. It's in flux. And there could be new things added, things removed, it just becomes an unstable version, which is different from a current version. When you're talking a current version, it doesn't mean that it's unstable. They're not going to change it anymore, but it's one that they're using for feedback so that they can come up with a long-term support version, or the LTS. And so it was interesting when I saw these version numbers. The odd number became one that, okay, hey, this is current and it's stable, but this may change. So you don't want to get too comfortable with it, because when the even number comes out, that's going to be the long-term support version. And the previous one, you have a very short time. When 6.0 gets released in November, you have until the end of February, 4 months, to get off 5.0 and jump on 6. Where if you would have stuck with 3.1, you have 14 months to move over to 6. Mm-hmm. So as you're picking these versions for a production environment, you have to be very careful of picking these particular versions. So if you're going to build a new project with 5.0, you need to be ready to move that project right off of 5.0 and into 6, because they're no longer going to support it. That doesn't mean that it's not going to run. That doesn't mean that it's not going to work. It's just that they're not going to release any more updates or security updates to that particular version. So it's important that you move off of it to continue to get the support. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So yeah, that was an interesting thing that I saw in the book. Now, I didn't want to use his book, obviously for copyright reasons. He has a similar image in his book, and so we want to preserve everything that he's got in his book. We don't want to show it on this particular podcast. If you want to see the stuff, go and buy it. So I found an alternative source that shows something similar to what he shows in his book. The other neat thing about that he mentioned is in version 6, it unifies all the platforms into that one framework, including mobile development. So you no longer have to put in all these additional libraries through a package manager in order to get mobile development. It's like everything's just kind of built into the framework. And it's a little bit more slim too. So if you're gonna be developing for Mac or Linux, you're gonna have a very small footprint of a framework. If you're gonna be developing for Windows, the footprint is still a little bit bigger because they are supporting the Windows development in the Windows version of the .NET Core or the .NET 5 framework. Yeah, I think that's all I had for chapter 1.
Cool.
Take it away.
All right.
Take us through chapter 2.
So for chapter 2, it was just introducing the new language we're going to be learning, basically.
All right.
It's kind of like, I like to think of it as just made up words that they made up, and kind of like Dr. Seuss. They just make up words.
Yeah.
They give a pretty good example of it in the book too. But yeah, and
what's an example that you can think of that you without taking the context out of the book, like what would you
like an example from C# kind of thing, or
yeah, like if you were to come up with your own example.
My own example,
make up your own word, and what would it be?
I guess instead of saying like different things in a category, maybe like if you have colors and types of animals or something, still kind of stealing from Dr. Seuss, like the red fish, blue fish, um, green. I don't know, another animal, like green turtle, something like that.
All right, yeah. I mean, we make up some pretty weird names sometimes. We don't expect normal people to understand it. So there's a concept talking about weird names, right? When you're developing an application and you deploy it, right? What happens is that you actually have two machines. One machine would be the one that's actually serving to the public, but you have another machine that's on standby. And so when you deploy the new version, you deploy it to the standby, and then you shut off the one that's currently in production and you turn on the one that's on standby. And now that one starts serving to the public. And so that concept is called red light, blue, what is it? Green, blue, green. So one is blue, one is green. So you could just say, okay, are we deploying the blue? Are we deploying the green? And I think Azure now calls them slots. So you can deploy to slot 1 or slot 2, and then you can just switch it. So you switch the traffic to go to slot 1 while you deploy to slot 2. And then when you're done and you want the traffic to get slot 2, you change it to point to slot 2. And now the traffic goes through the new code in slot 2. But it used to be blue-green deployment. So yeah, we come up with stuff like that. Go ahead.
And then it went through just understanding the whole process from C#1 to C#9.
Yeah.
All of the different features that they included in each version.
Let me tell you something about the process between C#1 and C#9. Okay.
It looks like a lot too. Like there's a whole bunch of just stuff they added. Seems like
20 years of development that Microsoft has done. But the thing about version 1 through version 9 is that a lot of it has been what they call syntactical sugar. So for example, it's just a way of shortening the amount of code that you write. And as we move on through this podcast, I'll point out syntactical sugar. And what we'll do is we'll go and like, how was this done in version 1.0 of C#? So that we understand what is syntactical sugar. So if I forget, remind me. It's like, is there any syntactical sugar in this, in this example that they're doing? So we'll try to bring that up on occasion, and we'll call it, we'll identify.
Yeah.
I
like how they just continued to add on to each one too. It wasn't like they just had to make a whole new one and start from the beginning.
Yeah.
But yeah,
they've been very careful about what it is that they introduce to the language, because once you put it in, you cannot take it out, and you would break a lot of legacy applications that are out there if you were to take out something. You just, whatever you put in, it stays. It's like, that's it. It's concrete. And so they're very careful about what it is that they add. They've done a lot of good additions to it.
And yeah, so then he went on to talk about just the I wasn't really understanding the specific language versions.
Like, what do you mean?
For the, well, I guess it doesn't really have to be. I was just saying that like having the latest one installed Yeah, never mind. So yeah, and then he went straight into working with the um or oh yeah, understanding the grammar of C#. So
Oh
once you're
yeah,
learning a new language, it's kind of different than the English language.
it is.
Um, so like in English, we would say the noun and then the verb, or like yeah, kind of like having the noun and then the verb equal like the sentence or whatever. You would have
Mhm.
to have the answer first and then have it equal to the noun and the verb or whatever you're trying to explain.
Is there an example that did they have an example of code?
Um, well, kind of like the um, yeah, he did have an example. It was like the black cat, and in French it's the the chat noir, so it's like the cat black instead of the having it like the black cat or whatever.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah, they do that in Spanish too.
Hmm.
Gato negro.
Hmm.
Instead of in English, it's black cat.
Black
I
cat,
see
yeah.
what you're saying. Okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And
Okay.
then also having the well, like I guess in English or in regular people language, the answer would go last. Like if you're saying um, uh, 1 + 1 = 2, you would have to write the answer first, or like having it the answer
Oh, I see what you're
one
saying.
plus one
Well, see, what's happening is that you're assigning the value to the
to the
variable.
to the variables. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what it is. So yeah, so that makes you want to open up. You want to share your screen,
Okay.
and we'll start a quick console application so that there's something concrete that people can understand what you mean.
This
All
is
right.
just
So yeah, we can just use this one right here. That's perfectly fine. Let's go ahead and increase the size. You can maximize the window. And then I think if you hold the control key and then you just you wheel the mouse, it increases the font size.
uh, maybe shift. Um,
The control key doesn't do it?
no.
Oh, that's a bummer. How about if you right click and you do,
Right click.
oh, does it do a zoom? Is there a zoom?
Mm,
No. Let's go look at view.
appearance. Zoom in. Oh, control equal.
Oh, okay.
There we go.
Yeah, there you go. That's good right there. We can go ahead and shut down that, go ahead and close that bottom window, the output. And then you go ahead and close that bottom one. And then if you click on the number 1, it will, over on the left,
Oh,
it'll give us even more screen size. Okay, cool. So, okay, so go ahead and talk to us. Tell us what you mean by the value first and then the calculation.
all
You,
right. So
you can do it.
if I was gonna make a variable
Okay.
right here, I would write um the kind of like the answer first, or how would you explain it? The
No, go ahead and explain it, and then we'll go through and explain it differently.
so if I want to make a variable with um total um goals, I'm just thinking of soccer. I would do that equals um team one's goal plus team two goal, like that. And then so that would be like the total amount of goals kind of thing.
Gotcha. Okay. So yeah, so the way you need to process in your mind, I guess, so that you can read it correctly, is you're going to process things from the right to the left.
Mm-hmm.
because when you're writing a regular math formula, so if you go to the end of line 8
Mm-hmm.
and then press enter, and then put 2 forward slashes so that we can do a comment, and then a space. So normally you would do something like 1 plus 2 equals 3, right? So go ahead and write that. Yeah. So the way the computer processes it processes, instead of left to right like we do the English language, the computer processes it from right to left. And in our mind, that's the way we got to think about it, because it's not that we're coming up with an answer, it's just that we're assigning the answer to a variable. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So in this case, if you go ahead and press enter again, say var1 teams1 goal equals 2.
Wait, say that again.
var teams1 goal equals 2,
equals 2.
and then your semicolon.
Oh.
And then the next one would be teams2 goal, and then we can make that to equals 3. And now we would get the total goals, right, from the sum of the two. But the way to look at it is that you're pushing things into a variable. So if you read it from right to left, right, you're just like, oh, 2 is gonna go into team's goal. Or you can say team's goal, teams1 goal is equal to 2. So it's basically, it's an assignment. It's the way to look at it, because it is confusing from the regular math equation where the equal sign is at the right side, and that's where the answer would be. But the answer in the programming language is not an answer, but it's more of an assignment. You're saying, I'm assigning this value to this variable. So you go from right to left. And so the other thing, and I think we're jumping a little bit ahead when I say this, and I think it's important that we cover it now. You remember he was talking about camel case versus title case?
Mm-hmm.
You remember?
Yeah.
What I know as title case is actually called Pascal case. And so some of us old timers in the industry, we're not gonna recognize it as title case. We're gonna say, oh, that's Pascal casing. Do you remember what that meant?
I don't remember, no.
So when you're assigning variables, you want to use camel case, which means that for every word that the variable is made up of, the first word is lowercase, and then the following words are all uppercase.
Okay.
So you want to change those on the other ones too. So yeah, that's the difference between camel case. Now you'll notice that class program is capitalized. The P is capitalized.
Yeah.
Static void main is capitalized. The M is capitalized. Those are written in Pascal casing, which is the same concept, right? If you were to go to the end of line 13 and press enter twice. Oh, you want to keep, okay. And then go to line 14 again and press enter one more time. Okay, and then tab once. So what we're going to do here is we're going to say static void my first method. How would that look?
My first method.
And then open close parenthesis and open close curly braces.
Inside?
No, after the parentheses.
Oh.
Because it's a method, it needs to be Pascal case, which means that my is capitalized.
Oh. So not the first, not these ones, not first and method, or would they also be capitalized?
They would also be capitalized.
Okay.
It's the subtle difference between camel case, which is how we're casing the variables, and Pascal case, or in the book, they're calling it title case.
Okay.
So Pascal or title case is all the words have a capital starting letter. And the Pascal, which is what variables are made of, is the first word is lowercase, and then every subsequent word after would be uppercase. So that would be the subtle difference between camel case and Pascal case.
All right.
So that's something, and it's a standard in the industry. You know,
Mhm.
this is how you're expected to, to program in this form. And that way, as you're getting into longer programs, you can tell just visually what belongs within the method and what's coming from outside the method. So anything that comes from outside the method is probably going to be title case, or as us in the industry call it, Pascal case. I'm going to use Pascal case because title case is confusing to me. just be aware that in the book they call it title case. So
Pascal sounds fancier anyway.
it does. Plus it's another programming language. So camel case, Pascal case, those are the two main naming styles, or capitalization styles that are available in programming. Yeah, so I mean, you'll see that the class program is Pascal, the method is Pascal, and the variables are camel.
Cool.
So and it's more of a visual than anything. The runtime, the compiler doesn't care. You can make everything lowercase, everything uppercase. It doesn't. Well, you got to do the keywords in proper case. So whatever the keywords need to be in, that's what the case is. But all your names, it could be all uppercase, all lowercase. That doesn't care. So.